Golden Age. Hollywood and Broadway were built on reinvention. Jewish artists helped create America's dream factory while facing prejudice and pressure to assimilate. Gay and bisexual artists worked under codes that punished honesty. For those who were both, the cost was even higher. Their work carried longing disguise and coded truths. This isn't scandal. This is the hidden private life behind America's classic works of art. George Cukor, the quiet master behind Hollywood's golden age. George Cukor helped shape two of Hollywood's most enduring films, The Philadelphia Story and My Fair Lady. Born in Manhattan to a Hungarian Jewish family, he began his career managing stage productions on Broadway before moving to Hollywood, where he became one of the industry's most respected directors. Cukor was celebrated for his literary adaptations, his graceful pacing, and his remarkable gift for guiding actors, a talent that linked his name permanently to stars like Katharine Hepburn, Judy Holliday, and Audrey Hepburn. He was often called a woman's director, a label that reflected both admiration and the era's limited vocabulary for describing his skill. Yet his public image told only part of the story. During Hollywood's studio era, Cukor's sexuality was treated as an open secret, quietly understood but rarely spoken of aloud. He built his authority instead through taste, discipline, intellect, and emotional control behind the camera. At one point, even being removed from Gone with the Wind despite his early involvement. This dual position as an outsider mattered. He came from a Jewish immigrant family in an industry largely shaped by immigrants while also living in a culture where a gay man's private life could easily be turned against him. His films carry a gentle, humane, closely observed quality, as if the camera understood how much everyday life requires quiet performance. The credits made him look discreet. The films reveal how well he understood masks and how a soft-spoken director could still command a room and leave an unmistakable mark on American cinema. Lorenz Hart, The Ache Behind the Wit. Lorenz Hart gave America My Funny Valentine and Blue Moon. As the lyricist behind Richard Rodgers' melodies, he helped create some of the most enduring songs in American musical theater. Britannica notes that Hart was born in New York to a German-Jewish immigrant family, and that background mattered. He transformed old-world wit language and memory into lyrics that felt clever, wounded, and intimate all at once. His private life was far less polished. Later biographical accounts describe Hart as a closeted gay man living in an era with little room for openness. He was also plagued by deep insecurity, partly tied to his short stature and a worsening alcoholism that damaged both his health and his creative partnership with Rodgers. That tension helps explain why his songs carry a double edge. They sparkle, then they sting. Hart wrote about longing with unusual tenderness, but often filtered it through irony, self-protection, or emotional distance. That doesn't mean every lyric was a coded confession. Rather, his artistry was shaped by a man who understood longing and loneliness from the inside. In the end, the partnership couldn't survive the private pain behind it, and Hart died young, his final years marked by decline. But his songs from shows like Pal Joey and Babes in Arms remain. Rodgers supplied the soaring melodies, but it was Hart's bruised intelligence that made those classics feel lived in rather than merely elegant. Leonard Bernstein, A Life Too Large for One Label. Leonard Bernstein stands taller than almost anyone else on this list. He composed West Side Story, led major orchestras as one of America's great conductors, educated television audiences through his young people's concerts, and became one of the most prominent Jewish cultural figures in the country. Born to an immigrant Jewish family, he moved effortlessly between the prestige of classical music, the energy of Broadway, and the life of a public intellectual. Yet his life never fit neatly into a single label. Bernstein had relationships with men, but he also built a long marriage with Felicia Montealegre. Historical accounts surrounding the film Maestro emphasize that Felicia understood important parts of that reality, even though understanding didn't erase the pain. Their marriage included children companionship and emotional compromises made under the weight of public image. That tension matters because Bernstein's body of work is so vast. He wrote music full of urgency, humor, spirituality, and conflict. In West Side Story, longing and division move through rhythm, collision, and impossible desire. His Jewish identity gave him a deep sense of inheritance and seriousness. His bisexuality complicated the public script of husband, father, and genius. The world saw a masterful conductor at the podium, including his celebrated years with the New York Philharmonic. Those closest to him saw the cost of holding every part of that brilliance together. Jerome Robbins' genius and its cost. Jerome Robbins helped create West Side Story and later shaped Fiddler on the Roof. Two works embedded deep in America's cultural memory. Born Jerome Wilson Rabinowitz, the son of Russian Jewish immigrants, he carried his Jewish identity openly through his family history. Though he spent much of his private life concealing other parts of himself, he became one of the rare artists whose choreography didn't just decorate a story, it directly drove character and belonging through movement itself. But Robbins is also the chapter where admiration must make room for discomfort. Biographical accounts describe him as a closeted gay man for most of his career, and records of his testimony before the House Un-American Activities Committee HUAC show that fear of exposure was part of the pressure surrounding his decision to cooperate and name former colleagues during an era when such fear was widespread in Hollywood and on Broadway alike. That context doesn't excuse what he did. It explains the climate in which terror, ambition, and self-preservation became tangled together. You can feel that tension in his work. West Side Story turns identity into motion. Fiddler on the Roof understands tradition, displacement, and communal memory with unusual power. The credits celebrate genius. History has to hold both the genius and the harm together. His artistry made Broadway greater. His fear and his compromises left a wound that remains attached to his name. Arthur Laurents, writing through the Lies Society, tells itself. Arthur Laurents wrote the book for West Side Story and Gypsy. That alone would secure his place in American cultural history. Born Arthur Levine in Brooklyn to a Jewish family, he later adopted his stage name partly to sidestep anti-Semitism in the industry, and he worked across radio, film, theater, and musicals, building a career devoted to exposing the lies polite society preferred to hide. That theme runs through his work. Rope centers on hidden violence dressed up in style and self-regard. West Side Story turns urban tension into tragedy. Gypsy is built on performance, longing, and self-reinvention. Laurents understood that public life is often a costume. Unlike many others discussed here, he later lived with far greater openness. The NYC LGBTQ Historic Sites Project notes that he lived with Tom Hatcher, his partner, for 52 years from 1960 until Hatcher's death, and Laurents himself passed away in 2011. That fact gives his chapter a peaceful center. His Jewish background placed him within America's larger story of self-reinvention. His identity as a gay man made him more inclined to question the rituals of social respectability. He wrote about surface appearances so beautifully because he never fully trusted them. His career is a reminder that honesty in art can arrive long before honesty becomes safe in public life. Clifton Webb elegance as armor. Clifton Webb is one of the most complicated figures on this list, and that's exactly why he belongs here. He became unforgettable in Laura, then turned elegance into a weapon on screen through roles like Waldo Lydecker and Mr. Belvedere. His voice, timing, and precision made him seem to stand above ordinary life. That polish also worked as a kind of armor. Webb's homosexuality has been widely discussed in biographical accounts, particularly how his public image was interpreted by audiences and colleagues alike. But his supposed Jewish ancestry deserves more caution. It's better treated as unconfirmed than established fact since reliable sources don't clearly support it. Even so, he fits neatly into the larger story of coded performance. Studio-era Hollywood could reward a distinctive style while punishing the private life behind it. Webb's on-screen manner looked ornamental, but it also looked defensive, exacting, and self-contained. He turned elegance into a strategy. Audiences saw sophistication. What they were really watching may have been survival. Off-screen, Webb lived with his devoted mother Mabel for most of his life, and their closeness became almost as famous as his film roles. Hollywood understood the truth about him without ever saying it aloud, and Webb, in his own dry way, seemed to understand that too, never confirming, never quite denying, always in control of the performance. Hart carried Broadway's glamour out of a poor and unstable childhood, and the distance he traveled between those two worlds became in many ways the defining shape of his life. He grew up in the Bronx in a Jewish immigrant family in circumstances marked by financial precarity, cramped apartments, and the constant anxiety of a household living close to the edge. From that beginning, he went on to become one of the most successful American playwrights of the 20th century. A man whose name would eventually be synonymous with wit, polish, and theatrical sophistication. As a writer and director, he helped shape the sensibility of sophisticated commercial theater, collaborating with figures like George S. Kaufman, and later directing landmark productions that defined an era of Broadway taste. His memoir, Act One, remains a classic account of theatrical ambition and self-reinvention, prized not only for its account of how a poor Bronx boy clawed his way into the theater, but for the way it mythologizes the very process of becoming someone else, of writing oneself into a new identity. But Hart needs to be handled carefully because the record on him is uneven in important ways. His Jewish background and immigrant origins are well established, documented extensively in his own writing and in the accounts of those who knew him. His sexuality, however, is not nearly so settled a matter. Biographers and later commentators have discussed rumors, emotional conflicts, and the possibility of unresolved bisexuality or same-sex desire. But the public record here is far less certain than it is for figures like Arthur Laurents or Farley Granger, whose lives and relationships are documented with much greater directness and confidence. Much of what has been said about Hart in this regard rests on speculation from colleagues, fragments from private letters, and accounts that only surfaced after his death when he was no longer able to confirm, deny, or contextualize any of it himself. So the honest approach isn't to force a label onto a life where the evidence remains genuinely murky, but rather to sit with that uncertainty as part of the story itself. What does seem clear and far better attested is the pressure of social respectability that shaped Hart's entire adult life. He built himself deliberately and carefully into a polished success story, a man who had escaped hardship through sheer will and talent, and who mastered the social world of the theater with an ease that looked from the outside almost effortless. Montgomery Clift brought extraordinary sensitivity to A Place in the Sun, and From Here to Eternity, performances that still feel remarkably contemporary in how much they trust silence and restraint over declaration. Long before method acting became a fashionable label bandied about in interviews and acting schools, Clift made screen performance feel internal, vulnerable, and dangerous, as though the camera were catching something the character himself wasn't fully aware of revealing. He was handsome, certainly possessed of the kind of classical film star face that could have carried a career on looks alone. But beauty was never the whole story with him, and audiences seemed to sense that instinctively. What made them react so strongly was the emotional exposure underneath the surface, the sense that something raw and unresolved was visible just beneath his composure. This chapter calls for caution regarding Jewish identity, since no such connection is established in the public record and shouldn't be overstated or implied where the sources simply don't support it. The more solid and better documented part of his story is his private sexuality. Biographical accounts and later commentary have long regarded Clift as gay or bisexual, drawing on the testimony of friends, colleagues, and those close to him during his life. But in his era, that kind of honesty could destroy a major star's image entirely, and the studio system was built to prevent exactly that kind of exposure. So he lived under a pressure that Hollywood knew exactly how to intensify, managing his public image through arranged appearances and careful silence, while the private cost of that management accumulated over the years. Then came the accident, an event that would reshape both his face and the remainder of his life. Britannica notes that during the filming of Raintree County, Clift was in a near-fatal car crash after leaving a party at Elizabeth Taylor's house. His car struck a telephone pole, and Taylor herself is credited with helping save his life at the scene, reportedly pulling broken teeth from his throat so he could breathe while they waited for help to arrive. The injuries permanently changed his appearance and health, altering the face that had once seemed almost impossibly cinematic, and his final years were marked by chronic pain, substance abuse, and a slow physical decline that colleagues found difficult to watch. But the legend endures because the work endures because what he left on film continues to speak for itself, regardless of how the off-screen story ended. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any new videos. See you in the next one.